Alright, you just found your first Dungeons and Dragons playgroup and you're worried about making mistakes, so I'm here to tell you my top 5 beginner mistakes that everyone does when they first start out. Alright, first of all, don't worry about making mistakes when you first start playing Dungeons and Dragons, because we all started somewhere, we were all beginner at one point, and I'm pretty sure every single one of the veterans that you now play with potentially, and even the DMs that have DM'd for hundreds of years now, have made these simple mistakes when they first started being a player. So number one on my list is one of the first things that you actually do when you start getting into Dungeons and Dragons. It is character creation. Everyone starts out by making their first own character, and there's so many options and possibilities with making a character that a lot of new players get absolutely paralyzed with what they can do, that they don't even know where to start, or they want everything and it gets too complicated. That's why I have a few simple pointers that you can look at to find what might be right for you, or that help you simplify your character after you have already written 10 pages of backstory. At that point, you don't really need to play D&D anymore because your character's already done, right? So to not overcomplicate your character, there's a few pointers that you can just use to ground yourself a little and cut some of the excess parts in your backstory that just make your character already have finished an entire character arc without having ever played. First of all is min-maxing and optimization for your character. There are some players who really prefer playing or building their characters like this, but when starting out, I feel like it is good to just focus on what you think could be fun. For stats and so on, just take a look at the player's handbook of the class that you want to play, and it should say a line for recommended stats or main stats for it. Just follow those, put your most points into those two stats, and you'll probably be fine as a decent member of the party in terms of usefulness. For example, for fighter, I'm pretty sure it says strength and constitution, or dexterity and constitution. Just following these guidelines a bit will absolutely help you in figuring out what the role of a character is before making the character final. Other than stats, obviously your character has their own personality and so on. You don't need to have the perfect idea when you first make a character, because in every story, characters develop. Maybe you have made a character with a personality that shifts throughout the story into a way that you didn't expect because it works differently with the group dynamic or dynamic of the world that they live in. So don't worry too much about having the perfect character ready on the first session of your first game ever with 2 pages of backstory. Most DMs lead like a paragraph of backstory. Anyways, 3 questions that help me with making my character. The first question I like to ask myself is, what's my basic concept for the character? The second question is very interesting for your DM as well, because it helps him create hooks. Why are they adventuring? What is their call to adventure? Why have they left their home or the comfort of their own house to face off to danger and meet new people and take on missions? It can be something very simple that develops more throughout interacting with other characters. The third question that I like asking is, what is a flaw they have? And it can be quirky, it can be very real as well. It's really up to you, but try and find something. It really helps. And with that, of course, comes one of the most important advice I have. Don't make your character perfect. There needs to be room for growth. You are literally just a level 1 person. Not much more powerful than a normal person. You should have a backstory that isn't concluded, if that makes sense. There needs to be room for more. You might be the exact opposite. Maybe you didn't write 2 or 3 pages of backstory. Instead, you are only writing a sentence. The DM can't do much with that, and it's really discouraging for everyone involved to not have your character actually have any involvement with the world and the characters that are in the world itself. The most basic things can make your DM happy, and having a paragraph or 2 paragraphs of backstory is more than enough. That is exactly what we want. I like asking these 3 questions of my players so that they think about it a little more, especially those that don't have enough backstory. It's good to get a feel for what the characters in my party are going to be like, and It helps the players identify more with their characters. So these are my questions. The second mistake that some new players sometimes happen to do, and these often end up on RPG horror stories. D&D is not a video game, and you're not the main character. At least you're not the only main character. So there's a lot of times where you have to take a step back, relax, and let other people play the game and play their scenes out. Not every scene is meant for every player. Some scenes are only meant for the druid of the party, and you can be a supporting character to elevate that person's scene more, but you should step back and be a side character in those moments. And you need to be okay with being a side character sometimes. Try not to force yourself into every scene. Let other people have the chance to talk and have their moments. There's limelight for everyone, and you should share it equally, which sometimes leads situations to come out with unfavorable situations, but I'm sorry, there is no quick save and quick load. You will have to live with these consequences, and you will have to make the best of it. In the same vein, you have to remember that there is no optimal way to solve things. There is no optimal way to fight every enemy the same way every time. There is no pattern to follow, or there is no timing for your iframes or anything. It's a free world. Generally, you are free to act how you want your character to act. And of course, that also means that NPCs are all different, and there aren't text boxes that you can use to get the right answer or ask the right question. Sometimes, of course, you have skill checks that will help with finding the solution to problems, but generally, there is no one solution solves all in Dungeons & Dragons. You have to understand that you're not confined just by code. You have free will, and so does the DM with the NPCs and so on. So not everything is as cut and dry as a video game would be. I'm throwing this in as like an honorable mention because I didn't write it down, but make sure you know the difference between what a character does and what a player does. The character can be a dick without the player being a dick. You do not need to hate your friend because this character is a dick. And if it is a problem for you, talk to them. I'm very passionate about this. But anyways, you know, let's cool off a little with number 3, which will actually rile me up a bit because it is a very common thing even with veteran players. Be ready for the session. Be prepared. Obviously, we expect you guys to like bring the stuff that you need for Dungeons and Dragons. Like you need your dice, you need your character sheet, you need, you know, whatever you need for your characters and so on. Like that is the bare minimum of what you have to do. What we actually need from you is to know what your characters do or what happened last time in the session. A little bit more prepared than just bringing your stuff and showing up. Be prepared in the sense of know what your character can do, know what the story is about, look up what NPCs were introduced last session. This isn't just from session to session, it also counts the same in combat. If you know your turn is coming up, pay attention and think about what your character wants to do already so that you don't hold up the whole encounter too long by thinking about what your character wants to do by the time it is your character's turn. You know, you're just like, oh yeah, la la la, watch what the others are doing, da 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 da. And then it comes to your turn and you look down at your shoe, you're like, let's see. And then it takes another 5 minutes for you to make your decision, especially when you have like, what, 15, 20 spells ready. If you can't remember fully what every feature or spell can do that your character is able to cast, or every item that he has, just take small cue cards, like bullet points explaining what the thing does. That's already good enough. But just make sure you know approximately like what your character is capable of and what the abilities do. It really helps a lot, and over time you will remember the smaller details as well. I don't expect my players to invest as much time into Dungeons & Dragons as I do because, you know, I'm even making content about it now. But I kind of expect them to at least know what their own character does. I don't need them to know what the warlock in their party does. If they are a fighter, that's fine. That's what I mean though. Just knowing your character means you're prepared for the session. Now don't forget your dice though. Number 4 is another reason for strife in a lot of these stories that we hear about. It is very simple to avoid. Just remember that the game is collaborative. There are no enemies at the table. There are enemies in the story. There's enemies on the table, maybe minis, you know, that are on the table representing enemies. But your DM isn't the enemy. The other players aren't your enemy. They're all players with you It's a collaborative storytelling game. Especially newer players sometimes ask, so how do I win? They're looking for a way to win Dungeons and Dragons, and there is no winning Dungeons and Dragons. The winning part of Dungeons and Dragons is having fun and creating a cool story with people you like. You need to be aware that you cannot win the game. There is just no winning, and you have to remember that it's not a players against DM or DM against players. It's a DM with players. Me as a DM, I only exist to enforce rules and describe your emotions and feelings and senses around you so that you can get a sense of the world. If it really was DM against players, the players wouldn't stand a chance. If the DM really wants you dead, you're gonna be dead. There is nothing you can do about it. So remember, he's not an enemy. Otherwise, you'd already be dead. It is very, very easy for a DM to kill players. It is very, very easy for a DM to kill characters. If that isn't proof that I don't exist to be an adversary, but to be an ally to build a story with, then I don't know what is. However, this is not to say that there aren't shitty DMs out there that do not understand that themselves, and they create this adversary kind of thing. That's a bad table to play at, first of all, but secondly, you should probably talk to them about it. And if they don't change, that is definitely a bad table to sit on, and you should leave. It's just a shitty table if there is animosity between player and DM. Like I said earlier, players and players are also not enemies. You're a party. Let them have the spotlight sometimes. Don't hog it for yourself. That brings me to another point I've written down that I didn't mention earlier when I talked about the collaborative nature of Dungeons and Dragons. Sometimes you might have a shy player, or maybe you're the shy player. And if you are, I hope for you that there's a veteran player at the table who, in character, throws the ball to you just so you get to talking. Because I know as a new player, it can be very scary to, speak up, come out of your shell a bit and explore role playing. And if you are a veteran player watching this for whatever reason, or you're a DM who watches this to send to the new players, then veteran players and DMs pass the speech ball over to the more shy players so everyone gets a chance. The last point that I want to make is more of a personal pet peeve, I think. Maybe there's other DMs out there that also have this or, find this problematic in a way. I really, really don't like when players ask, oh, can I roll for this? Without explaining anything or asking anything, they're just like, oh, can I roll for nature? And I'm like, what are you even doing? I don't even know what you're doing. How am I supposed to explain it? I always tell my players, if there's something you want to do, you tell me you want to do. You tell me my character does this, or I'm going to do this. If there is a roll required, I will ask you to roll. And that's when you roll. I don't like unprompted rolls because a lot of the times players also expect there to be a roll for something that doesn't actually need a roll. Sometimes players don't think there's a roll for something that actually does need a roll, and the DM should be the factor that decides that, right? There's an even worse level to this. When people just roll a die and then go, I rolled an 18, and I'm behind my DM screen and I'm looking up, I'm looking over it, I'm like, for what? What is going on? If you're playing in my campaign for whatever reason that you're seeing this, wait for me to ask for a roll, I guess. Of course, if someone says something like, I would like to look around for edible berries in this area, can I roll for nature or survival? I'm gonna be like, okay, yeah, that's a better approach already, which I much prefer. It feels more roleplay, but maybe I'm just weird for this. Personal pet peeve. Roll your dice when your DM asks and not any other time. Very important side note here. If you want to do something, let's say I would like to intimidate this guard, your DM then says oh yeah, sure, roll intimidation. You look at your character sheet and you see, oh, I'm not good at intimidation because I'm a barbarian and I don't have charisma at all. I'm like on 8 points of charisma. Feel free to ask your DM or suggest to your DM, hey, I'm using like my huge build and scary massive weapon. Can I maybe use strength instead for this intimidation check? That I think is perfectly fine, and honestly encouraged. Make sure that if you feel like there's a stat that better reflects what you're trying to do in that moment, bring it up. I don't think this is asking for a role the way I described it, if that makes sense. And with that, my quick 5 tips. Of course, it's just silly little mistakes. Everyone does them. Don't worry too much about them. If one of them happens to you, if more of them happens to you, that's also fine. If all of them happens to you, that's a bit sus. Try and avoid aspects like this when it's your first time at a table. And if it's your 25th time at a table, revert back to being chaotic and, you know, just an imp causing chaos at the table. Of course, I'm just kidding. Be well behaved, follow these steps, and you're gonna have a good first session with your new friends perhaps, or your old friends. I hope you had fun listening to my ramblings, and I hope to see you in the next video. You might enjoy some of my previous videos. I'll see you around, hopefully. Hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.